Section 5, Letters 21 to 25. Letter the 21st. The Vicomte de Valmont to the Marquise de Merteuil.
At last, my lovely friend, I have taken a step forward, a really great step, and one which, if it has not taken me to my goal, has at least let me know that I am on the right road, and dispelled the fear I was in that I was lost. I have at last declared my love, and although the most obstinate silence had been maintained, I have obtained a reply that is perhaps the least equivocal and the most flattering. But let us not anticipate events. Let us begin further back. You will remember that a watch was set upon my movements. Well, I resolved that this scandalous means should turn to public edification, and this is what I did. I charged my confidant with the task of finding me some poor wretch in the neighbourhood who was in need of succour. This commission was not difficult to fulfil. Yesterday afternoon he gave me the information that they were going to seize to-day, in the morning, the goods of a whole family who could not pay their taxes. I assured myself that there was no girl or woman amongst this household whose age or face might render my action suspicious, and when I was well informed, I declared at supper my intention of going after game in the morning. Here I must render justice to my Présidente. Doubtless she felt a certain remorse at the orders which she had given, and not having the strength to vanquish her curiosity, she had at least enough to oppose my desire. It was going to be excessively hot. I ran the risk of making myself ill. I should kill nothing, and tire myself to no purpose. And during all this dialogue, her eyes, which spoke perhaps better than she wished, let me see quite sufficiently that she desired me to take these bad reasons for good. I was careful not to surrender, as you may believe, and I even resisted a little diatribe against sportsmen and sport, and a little cloud of ill humour, which obscured during all the evening that celestial brow. I feared for a moment that her orders had been revoked, and that her delicacy might hinder me. I did not calculate on the strength of a woman's curiosity, and so was deceived. My chasseur reassured me the same evening, and I went satisfied to bed. At daybreak I rose and started off. Barely 50 yards from the château I perceived the spy who was to follow me. I started after the game, and walked across country to the village whither I wished to make, with no other pleasure on the road than to give a run to the rogue who followed me, and who, not daring to quit the road, often had to cover at full speed a 3 times greater distance than mine. By dint of exercising him, I was excessively hot myself, and I sat down at the foot of a tree. He had the insolence to steal behind a bush, not 20 paces from me, and to sit down as well. I was tempted for a moment to fire my gun at him, which, although it only contained small shot, would have given him a sufficient lesson as to the dangers of curiosity. Luckily for him, I remembered that he was useful and even necessary to my projects. This reflection saved him. However, I reach the village. I see the commotion. I step forward. I question somebody. The facts are related. I have the collector called to me, and yielding to my generous compassion, I pay nobly 56 livres, for lack of which 5 persons were to be left to straw and their despair. After this simple action, you cannot imagine what a crowd of benedictions echoed round me from the witnesses of the scene. What tears of gratitude poured from the eyes of the aged head of the family, and embellished his patriarchal face, which a moment before had been rendered really hideous by the savage marks of despair. I was watching this spectacle when another peasant, younger, who led a woman and 2 children by the hands, advanced to me with hasty steps, and said to them, "Let us all fall at the feet of this image of God." And at the same instant I was surrounded by the family, prostrate at my knees. I will confess my weakness. My eyes were moistened by tears, and I felt an involuntary but delicious emotion. I am astonished at the pleasure one experiences in doing good, and I should be tempted to believe that what we call virtuous people have not so much merit as they lead us to suppose. However that may be, I found it just to pay these poor people for the pleasure which they had given me. I had brought 10 louis with me, and I gave them these. The acknowledgments began again, but they were not pathetic to the same degree. Necessity had produced the great, the true effect. The rest was but a simple expression of gratitude and astonishment at superfluous gifts. However, in the midst of the loquacious benedictions of this family, I was by no means unlike the hero of a drama in the scene of the dénouement. Above all, you will remark the faithful spy was also in this crowd. My purpose was fulfilled. I disengaged myself from them all, and regained the château. On further consideration, I congratulated myself on my inventive genius. This woman is doubtless well worth all the pains I take. They will one day be my titles with her, and having in some sort, as it were, paid in advance, I shall have the right to dispose of her according to my fantasy, without having any cause to reproach myself. I forgot to tell you that, to turn everything to profit, I asked these good people to pray for the success of my projects. You shall see whether their prayers have not been already in part hearkened to. But they come to tell me that supper is ready, and it would be too late to dispatch this letter if I waited to end it after rising from table. To be continued, therefore, in our next. I am sorry, for the sequel is the finest part. Adieu, my lovely friend. You steal from me a moment of the pleasure of seeing her. At the Château de 20th of August, 17.
Letter the 22nd, the Présidente de Tourvel to Madame de Volanges.
You will doubtless be well pleased, madame, to hear of a trait in Monsieur de Valmont, which is in great contrast to all those under which you have represented him to me. It is so painful to have to think unfavourably of anybody, so grievous to find only vices in people who should possess all the qualities necessary to make virtue lovable. Moreover, You love so well to be indulgent, that were it only to oblige you, I must give you a reason for reconsidering your too harsh judgment. Monsieur de Valmont seems to me entitled to hope for this favour, I might almost say this justice, and this is on what I base my opinion. This morning he made one of those excursions which might lead one to believe in some project on his part, in the vicinity, just as the idea came to you of one, an idea which I accuse myself of having entertained with too much precipitation. Luckily for him, and above all luckily for us, since we are thus saved from being unjust, one of my men happened to be going in that same direction.
Note: Madame de Tourvel, then, does not dare to say that it was by her order.
And it is from this source that my reprehensible but fortunate curiosity was satisfied. He related to us that Monsieur de Valmont, having found an unfortunate family in the village of whose goods were being sold because they were unable to pay their taxes, not only hastened to pay the debt of these poor people, but even added to this gift a considerable sum of money. My servant was a witness of this virtuous action, and he related to me in addition that the peasants, talking amongst themselves and with him, had said that a servant, whom they described, and who is believed by mine to be that of Monsieur de Valmont, had sought information yesterday as to any of the inhabitants of the village who might be in need of help. If that be so, it was not merely a passing feeling of compassion, suggested by the opportunity. It was the deliberate project of doing good. It was a search for the chance of being benevolent. It was the fairest virtue of the most noble souls. But be it chance or design, it is none the less a laudable and generous action, the mere recital of which moved me to tears. I will add more, and still from a sense of justice, that when I spoke to him of this action, which he had never mentioned, he began by excusing himself, and had the air of attaching so little importance to it, that the merit of it was enhanced by his modesty. After that, tell me, my esteemed friend, if Monsieur de Valmont is indeed an irreclaimable libertine? If he can be no more than that, and yet behave so, what is left for honest folk? What! Are the wicked to share with the good the sacred joy of charity? Would God permit that a virtuous family should receive from the hands of a villain succour for which they render thanks to divine Providence? And could it please him to hear pure lips bestow their blessings upon a reprobate? No. I prefer to hold that errors, long as they may have lasted, do not endure for ever, and I cannot think that he who does good can be the enemy of virtue. Monsieur de Valmont is perhaps only one more instance of the danger of associations. I remain of this opinion which pleases me. If on one side it may serve to justify him in your opinion, on the other, it renders more and more precious to me the tender friendship which unites me to you for life. I have the honour to be, etc. P.S. Madame de Rosemonde and I are going this moment to see for ourselves this worthy and unfortunate family, and to unite our tardy aid to that of Monsieur de Valmont. We shall take him with us. We shall at least give these good people the pleasure of seeing their benefactor. That is, I believe, all he has left for us to do. At the Château de 20th August, 17 .
Letter the 23rd. The Vicomte de Valmont to the Marquise de Merteuil.
I left off at my return to the château. I resume my tale. I had only time to make a hurried toilette ere I repaired to the drawing-room, where my beauty was working at her tapestry, whilst the curé of the place was reading the Gazette to my old aunt. I went and took my seat by the frame. Glances sweeter than were customary, and almost caressing, enabled me soon to divine that the servant had already given an account of his mission. Indeed, the dear inquisitive lady could no longer keep the secret which she had acquired, and, without fear of interrupting a venerable pastor, whose recital indeed resembled a sermon, I too have a piece of news to recite, said she, and suddenly related my adventure, with an exactitude which did honour to the intelligence of her historian. You may conceive what play I made with my modesty. But who can stop a woman when she praises the man whom, without knowing it, she loves? I decided therefore to let her have her head. One would have thought she was making the panegyric of a saint. All this time I was observing, not without hope, all the promises of love in her animated gaze, her gesture, which had become more lively, and above all her voice, which, by its already perceptible alteration, betrayed the emotion of her soul. She had hardly finished speaking when, "Come, my nephew," said Madame de Rosemonde to me, "come and let me embrace you." I felt at once that the pretty preacher could not prevent herself from being embraced in her turn. However, she wished to fly, but she was soon in my arms, and so far from having the strength to resist, she had scarcely sufficient to maintain herself. The more I observe this woman, the more desirable she appears to me. She hastened to return to her frame, and to everybody had the appearance of resuming her tapestry. But I saw well that her trembling hand prevented her from continuing her work. After dinner the ladies insisted on going to see the unfortunates whom I had so piously succoured. I accompanied them. I spare you the tedium of this second scene of gratitude and praise. My heart, impelled by a delicious recollection, hurries on the moment for return to the château. On the way, my fair Présidente, more pensive than is her wont, said never a word. Occupied as I was in seeking the means of profiting by the effect which the episode of the day had produced, I maintained the same silence. Madame de Rosemonde was the only one to speak, and obtained from us but scant and few replies. We must have bored her. That was my intention, and it succeeded. Thus, on stepping from the carriage, she passed into her apartment, and left my fair one and myself tête-à-tête in a dimly lighted room, a sweet obscurity which emboldens timid love. I had not to be at the pains to lead the conversation into the channel which I wished. The fervour of the amiable preacheress served me better than any skill of my own. "When one is capable of doing good," said she, letting her sweet gaze rest on me, "how can one pass one's life in doing ill?" "I do not deserve either that praise or that censure," said I, "and I cannot imagine how you, who have so clear a wit, have not yet divined me. Though my confidence may damage me in your eyes, you are far too worthy of it that I should be able to refuse it. You will find the key to my conduct in my character, which is unhappily far too easy going. Surrounded by persons of no morality, I have imitated their vices. I have perhaps made it a point of vanity to surpass them. In the same way, attracted here by the example of virtue, without ever hoping to come up to you, I have at least endeavoured to imitate you. Perhaps the action for which you praise me to-day would lose all value in your eyes if you knew its true motive. You see, my fair friend, how near the truth I touched. It is not to myself, I went on, that these unfortunates owe their rescue. Where you think you see a praiseworthy action, I did but seek a means to please. I was nothing else, since I must say it, but the weak agent of the divinity whom I adore. Here she would have interrupted me, but I did not give her time. At this very moment even, I added, my secret only escapes from my weakness. I had vowed that I would be silent before you. I made it my happiness to render to your virtues, as much as to your charms, a pure homage, of which you should always remain ignorant. But incapable of deception, when I have before my eyes the example of candour, I shall not have to reproach myself to you with guilty dissimulation. Do not believe that I insult you by entertaining any criminal hope. I shall be miserable, I know, but my sufferings will be dear to me. They will prove to me the immensity of my love. It is at your feet, it is on your bosom, that I will cast down my woes. There shall I draw the strength to suffer anew. There shall I find compassionate bounty, and I shall deem myself consoled because you will have pitied me. O you whom I adore, hearken to me, pity me, succour me. By this time I was at her feet, and I pressed her hands in mine. But she suddenly disengaged them, and, folding them over her eyes, cried with an expression of despair, "O wretched me!" then burst into tears. Luckily, I was exalted to such a degree that I also wept. And seizing her hands again, I bathed them with my tears. This precaution was most necessary, for she was so full of her grief that she would not have perceived my own, had I not taken this means of informing her. I moreover gained the privilege of considering at my leisure that charming face, yet more embellished by the potent charm of her tears. My head grew hot, and so little was I master of myself, that I was tempted to profit by that moment. Oh, what is this weakness of ours? Of what avail is the force of circumstances, if, forgetting my own projects, I risked losing, by a premature triumph, the charms of a long battle, and the details of a painful defeat, if, seduced by the desires of youth, I thought of exposing the conqueror of Madame de Tourvel to the pain of plucking, for the fruit of victory, but the insipid consolation of having had one woman more. Oh, let her surrender, but let her first fight. Let her, without having strength to conquer, have enough to resist. Let her relish at her leisure the sentiment of her weakness, and be constrained to confess her defeat. Let us leave it to the obscure poacher to kill at a bound the stag he has surprised. Your true hunter will give it a run. Is not this project of mine sublime? Yet perhaps I should be now regretting that I had not followed it, had not chance come to the rescue of my prudence. We heard a noise. Some one was coming to the drawing-room. Madame de Tourvel, in alarm, rose precipitately, seized one of the candles, and left the room. I could not but let her go. It was only one of the servants. As soon as I was assured of this, I followed her. I had hardly gone a few paces before, whether that she had recognized me, or for some vague sentiment of terror, she quickened her steps, and flung herself into, rather than entered, her chamber, the door of which she closed behind her. I went after her, but the door was locked inside. I was careful not to knock. That would have been to give her the chance of a too easy resistance. I had the good and simple idea of peeping through the keyhole, and I saw this adorable woman on her knees, bathed with tears, and fervently praying. What god did she dare invoke? Is there one potent enough to resist love? In vain henceforward will she invoke extraneous aid. 'Tis I who will order her destiny. Thinking I had done enough for one day, I too withdrew to my own room and started to write to you. I hoped to see her again at supper, but she had given out that she was indisposed, and had gone to bed. Madame de Rosemonde wished to go up to her, but the cunning invalid alleged a headache which prevented her from seeing anybody. You may guess that after supper the interval was short, and that I too had my headache. Withdrawing to my room, I wrote a long letter to complain of this severity, and went to bed with the intention of delivering it to her this morning. I slept badly, as you can see by the date of this letter. I rose and re-read my epistle. I discovered that I had not been sufficiently restrained, had exhibited less love than ardour. It must be written again, but in a calmer mood. I see the day break, and I hope the freshness which accompanies it will bring me sleep. I am going to return to my bed, and whatever may be the power of this woman over me, I promise you never to be so occupied with her as to lack time to think much of you. Adieu, my lovely friend. At the Château de 21st August 17, at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Letter the 24th. The Vicomte de Valmont to the Présidente de Tourvel.
Ah, madame, deign in pity to calm the trouble of my soul. Deign to tell me what I am to hope or fear. Cast between the extremes of happiness and misfortune, uncertainty is a cruel torment. Why did I speak to you? Why did I not know how to resist the imperious charm which betrayed my thoughts to you? Content to adore you in silence, I had at least the consolation of my love, and this pure sentiment, untroubled then by the image of your grief, sufficed for my felicity. But that source of happiness has become my despair, since I saw your tears flow, since I heard that cruel, wretched me. Madame, those words will echo long within my heart. By what fatality can the sweetest of the sentiments inspire nothing but terror? What, then, is this fear? Ah, it is not that of reciprocation. Your heart, which I have misunderstood, is not made for love. Mine, which you calumniate unceasingly, is the only one which is disturbed. Yours is even pitiless. If it were not so, you would not have refused a word of consolation to the wretch who told you of his sufferings. You would not have withdrawn yourself from his sight when he has no other pleasure than that of seeing you. You would not have played a cruel game with his anxiety by letting him be told that you were ill, without permitting him to go and inform himself of your health. You would have felt that the same night, which did but mean for you 12 hours of repose, would be for him a century of pain. Oh, for what cause, tell me, have I deserved this intolerable severity? I do not fear to take you for my judge. What have I done, then, but yield to an involuntary sentiment, inspired by beauty and justified by virtue, always restrained by respect, the innocent avowal of which was the effect of trust and not of hope? Will you betray that trust which you yourself seemed to permit me, and to which I yielded myself without reserve? No, I cannot believe that. It would be to imply a fault in you, and my heart revolts at the bare idea of detecting one. I withdraw my reproaches. Write them I can, but think them never. Ah, let me believe you perfect. It is the one pleasure which is left me. Prove to me that you are so by granting me your generous aid. What poor wretch have you ever helped who was in so much need as I? Do not abandon me to the frenzy in which you have plunged me. Lend me your reason, since you have ravished mine. After having corrected me, give me light to complete your work. I would not deceive you. You will never succeed in subduing my love, but you shall teach me to moderate it. By guiding my conduct, by dictating my speech, you will save me at least from the dire misfortune of displeasing you. Dispel above all that dreadful fear. Tell me that you forgive me, that you pity me. Assure me of your indulgence. You will never have as much as I should desire in you, but I invoke that of which I have need. Will you refuse it me? Adieu, madame. Be kind enough to receive the homage of my sentiments. It hinders not that of my respect. At the Château de 20th August, 17.
Letter the 25th. The Vicomte de Valmont to the Marquise de Merteuil.
This is yesterday's bulletin. At 11 o'clock I visited Madame de Rosemonde, and under her auspices I was introduced into the presence of the pretended invalid, who was still in her bed. Her eyes looked very worn. I hope she slept as badly as I did. I seized a moment when Madame de Rosemonde had turned away to deliver my letter. It was refused, but I left it on the bed, and went decorously to the side of my old aunt's armchair. She wished to be near her dear child. It was necessary to conceal the letter to avoid scandal. The invalid was artless enough to say that she thought she had a little fever. Madame de Rosemonde persuaded me to feel her pulse, vaunting mightily my knowledge of medicine. My beauty then had the double vexation of being forced to give me her hand, and of feeling that her little falsehood was to be discovered. I took her hand, which I pressed in one of mine, whilst with the other I ran over her fresh and rounded arm. The naughty creature made no response, which impelled me to say, as I withdrew, "There is not even the slightest symptom." I suspected that her gaze would be severe, and to punish her, I refused to meet it. A moment later she said that she wished to rise, and we left her alone. She appeared at dinner, which was a sombre one. She gave out that she would not take a walk, which was as much as to tell me that I should have no opportunity of conversing with her. I was well aware that at this point I must put in a sigh and a mournful look. No doubt she was waiting for that, for it was the one moment of the day when I succeeded in meeting her eyes. Virtuous as she has her little ruses like another. I found a moment to ask of her if she had had the kindness to inform me of my fate, and I was somewhat astonished when she answered, "Yes, monsieur, I have written to you." I was mighty anxious to have this letter, but whether it were a ruse again, or for awkwardness or shyness, she did not give it to me till the evening, when she was retiring to her apartment. I send it you, as well as the first draft of mine. Read and judge. See with what signal falsity she says that she feels no love, when I am sure of the contrary. And then she will complain if I deceive her afterwards, when she does not fear to deceive me before. My lovely friend, the cleverest of men can do no more than keep on a level with the truest woman. I must needs, however, feign to believe all this nonsense, and weary myself with despair, because it pleases Madame to play at severity. It is hard not to be revenged on such baseness. Ah, patience! But adieu, I have still much to write. By the way, return me the letter of the fair barbarian. It might happen later that she would expect one to attach a value to those wretched sheets, and one must be in order. I say nothing to you of the little Volanges. We will talk of her at an early day. At the Château of 22nd August, 17.
End of